be interactive, so questions anytime are welcome. That lets me know that people are awake and have their coffee and that kind of thing. Okay, so first of all, what is ACL? ACL stands for Access Control Lists. It's basically, it's very similar to the kind of system you have in any operating system like Linux or Windows, where you can control who can see what files, who can, either see them, delete them, edit them, create them, right? And ACL is just the acronym that is used to describe that. And there are lots of different ways that you could, in principle, implement ACL. And in fact, one of the things that took so long about getting 1.6 out the door was that I think they finally got it on about the third or fourth try. They came up with something that everybody kind of liked and thought was pretty good. And remarkably, since 1.6 came out in last January, there have been relatively few bugs reported on the actual ACL system. I mean, there are things that are, there are tweaks or things maybe we forgot to do something or whatever. But in terms of the basic functioning of the system, it was pretty solid. It's been a pleasant. I don't want to say surprise, but it's been better than I expected. Okay, so I already kind of previewed this. In Joomla, we want to conceptually separate out, because we really have two ACL systems in Joomla. We have one system that controls the viewing of items, and it's really conceptually very different from the system that controls what kind of actions, what kind of things people can do to different items. Okay, so it's best just to separate those from the get-go. A lot of times, all you need is one or the other. In many cases, all you're maybe concerned about is what people can see, in which case you really only have to focus on this one part of it. Or maybe you're mainly focused on what people can do, in which case you're focused on the other part. Okay? Right. And the setup is different, as we'll see. And in fact, you could actually have completely separate groups that are these groups are only used for seeing, and these groups are only used for doing, if you wanted to. They don't have to. They don't have to be the same. The one thing that one thing that the whole ACL system has in common, it's kind of the foundation of the whole system, is the concept of groups. Okay, and I think the best way to think about a group is not. It is as a role, a hat that somebody's wearing, a role that they're doing. Okay, so a group might be the admin for an entire site, or the admin for part of the site, or somebody who contributes content, or the public. And the key thing here is that somebody can be a member of more than one group. Somebody can wear more than one hat. Okay? So you can have as many groups as you want, and an individual user can be a member of as many groups as you want. Okay, so first thing we want to talk about is how do we control what people can see. Good news here is this system is really pretty simple. You create any number of access levels you want, and then every time you create an item, which could be a module, could be a category, could be an article, a contact, menu item, you assign it one access level. Each item can only have one access level. Each user can have many access levels, but each item has one. Okay? So this is all there is to it. I have one user that can be a member of multiple groups. Each group can have multiple access levels. So between those two, I get a list of access levels, right? I get an access level for each group, and I put those together, and I've got my access level for the user, right? It's just a list. Go through N. And then when I'm going to look at something, it's got one access level, right? So is that access level on the list? If it is, hooray. If it's not, too bad. Right? Okay, now, you want to have a little fun? I need some volunteers. I need 3 volunteers to be things, and I need 3 volunteers to be users. Come on. Up, just come on up.
You can volunteer for me too.
Are these slides going to be available later?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think they'll probably put on. It'll be a user or a thing. Okay. User or a thing. Okay.
Thing's going to be dangerous.
Okay, you want to be thing? There you go. So things over here, users over there.
Things.
Okay. There you go.
Surprise me.
Thing
Right.
and user. So you guys over here. No, things over here, users over here.
I don't know.
You're a user.
Whatever I am.
Okay.
We want to be a public.
Okay, so now and the audience here, the class here is going to be the Joomla program, okay? So who's our first user? Okay, so pick one thing, walk over here, and pick a thing.
Okay.
Okay? Okay,
It's nice to
so now,
introduce ourselves.
you read what your access level is here. Separate, come out of that so everybody see. Okay, what's your access level?
Halt, I'm access level student.
And what's on your list? Read all the ones on your list.
I'm a user, none. Groups, none. Access level, public.
What do you think, guys? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs down. Thumbs down. Okay.
Can I trade this?
No. Next user. Okay, so pick one of the other things. Okay, so read your access level. What are you, Matt?
Access level.
You're an article?
I'm an article. My access level is public.
Public.
Well, you're in the groups.
I was going to pick him first.
Groups.
Check me.
Groups says public.
Yeah, okay, so
Yay.
what do we think? Is it the
Yay.
public group? Yeah,
Yay.
thumbs up. Okay, we got one more.
Yes.
All right, so
I am
Go on,
teacher's
user.
contact info. My access level is a parent.
I'm a user. My groups are student and public. My access levels are student and public.
Sorry.
What do you think?
No.
No?
No,
Okay,
sorry.
thank you very much.
It was easy.
Sure.
Okay, so that gives you the idea. It's pretty simple, right? You know, it's a little bit complicated on the user group side because that's where you've got all these different access levels. But it's really pretty simple. I mean, you got one access level and you got a list. It's either on the list or it's not on the list. Okay? So I want you to take a minute to relish the simplicity because the next one isn't as simple. Okay? So one of the key things here is there's no hierarchical, there's no covariance, there's no nothing. You know, it's just drop dead simple.
So they're standalone. The group's below another group is irrelevant.
Right. Exactly. That's why it's like 2 separate systems. So viewing is all or nothing. You take a user, you use this first method here, authorized view levels, and that gives you your list, and you just see if it's in the list. Okay, so talk just a little bit about setting it up. For either of these, for any of this access control stuff, planning is really important. It's really key to sort of think ahead of time. You know, what are you doing? How is this going to work? What kinds of, who's going to be doing what? Who's going to be seeing what? How do you want to control things? And think about it. Well, a little bit of thought up front really can make your life easy down the road. And in fact, what I would do if I was doing a complicated one is I'd do some more prototyping. Just try it out and create a few users, create a few groups, and just see how it comes together. So basically, planning, you create your groups, you create your access levels, and I can go into. Is everybody familiar with the back end, or should we go into the back end and look at where these things are done? So the first thing you want to do in both these cases, create your groups, because when you create your access levels, and there's nothing to the group. I mean, the group is just group and a name, and then the parent. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the parent stuff later, the hierarchy. But basically, it's just group, title, and then the parent. So there's not much to that. So that's the first thing you would typically do, and then when you do the access levels, you need to have the groups defined because that's where that's how you connect the groups to the access levels. And then, then the other thing, of course, is the users. And when you define the user, that's where you connect the users to the groups. Oops, let's do that down here. So this is where you connect the users to groups. Okay.
Just because I might be getting a little confused early on. I know for a fact that super user, he inherited all those other groups.
No, not true. Not on the view access levels.
Okay.
You can actually, as I mentioned, they're separate, and you could actually have it that the super admin couldn't view anything on the front end if you wanted to. So it's a separate guy. But you're right. On the other side, when we get to the actions, the super admin is a special case. That's over on what you can do, not what you can see. Okay, so any questions so far on this part? Any other questions? So back to our slideshow again. Right, and then the site content, again, everything just gets assigned to one access level, and we'll talk about some ways to think about that when we get into the examples. So a key thing to think about with access levels is that they're kind of indivisible in the sense that if two items have the same access level, then obviously the same people are going to be able to see those. Right? You can't have two items that have the same access level and somehow this person can see that one and not that one. If they have the same access level, anybody that can see one can see the other. Right? So that's kind of the bottom. That's the lowest level of detail or granularity. Yeah.
We use the word key instead of level. Would I lose anything in understanding what you're talking about? Because level gives me this sense of hierarchy, whereas key, I understand. Boom.
Yeah.
You got the
That's fine.
key.
Yeah, you're right. Level is kind of misleading in that sense.
You're right.
Access maybe is better term. And the other thing to keep in mind about the access or access level is it's probably the hardest thing to change after the fact, because if you got hundreds or thousands of articles or dozens of menu items or whatever. I mean, that's the thing that's spread hither, thither, and yon throughout your data. So that's probably the hardest thing to change after the fact. Groups, assigning groups to access levels or assigning users to groups is fairly easy. But getting the access levels right in the content items and in the menus and stuff is the thing that you really don't want to have to rework after the fact. Now, there's a cool new feature, well, new as of 1.6, that kind of snuck in late in the development process, which is that in 1.5 you couldn't have content that was viewable by the public and not viewable by registered users, whereas now with 1.6 and 1.7 you can. And it's implemented in a really simple way. we have this guest user group that defaults to public, and if you leave that public, then you get the standard behavior that you would expect, which is that a poor guy over here that was none on his user groups, could see everything that's public. But if we change that to a different group, and then we could potentially say that guests get that group, but registered users don't get that access level. So then you could have content that is shown only to unregistered users and not to registered users.
So you could like use that to restrict a registered user, like you don't want to show them everything, so you're actually limited to normal public view, and just.
Well, a classic example would be if you had ads there, and you say if you register, you don't have to look at the ads.
Right.
So the ads go away as soon but the guest is seeing content that the registered user is not seeing. So that's kind of a cool little feature that's snuck in there. A lot of people may not know about. Okay, so that's access view levels. That's kind of the simple side of things. Any questions about that? Before we dive into that.
But where do you control that last part that you just
Okay.
talked about?
So if we go, so here I'm in the users, the settings, user manager settings, right, or options. Then this guest user group would, if you set that to public, then that's the group that an unregistered user gets by default. But if you change that, then if I come into the site as a guest, you could set up a separate user group guest that had a different access level than other groups, so that unregistered users would have their own level and therefore could see their own content that potentially others couldn't see. Does that make sense? Okay, so this again is based on groups. Now we're talking about what people can do. We're talking about actions. Things like creating, editing, changing the publish status, getting access to the backend component, things like that. Actions as opposed to seeing. And this is based on a predefined set of actions. Okay, so for any given component, the component developer says, for my component, there's 6 actions. Boom, 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 boom. And then, based on that, you can control each group which actions they have available in that component. Okay? Now, the most confusing aspect about this is the idea of hierarchies, where you can have groups that inherit from the group above and so forth. But the important thing to understand right off the get-go is that's totally optional. You do not have to use that hierarchical system. It's there to save you work. In some cases, it could save a lot of work if you have a really complicated site with groups that kind of branch, they're just like the group above except for this one thing. But you do not have to make your groups hierarchical at all. You can make them completely flat. You can make every group at the same level, in which case you just define every action for every group, for every component, just exactly how you want it. And if you change one group, it doesn't affect any other group. Okay? So it's totally optional. It's just like categories, right? Categories, you can make hierarchical or you can make them flat, right? You can make a category system in 1.7 that's much simpler than the old 1.5 system. If you said, I don't need 2 levels, I just want 1 level, you can make a 1-level flat category system, and you can do the same thing with your groups. You can make a simpler system, or you can make a more complicated system. It's entirely up to you. Okay. And we use the user get authorized. Oh, it's not on here. Oh, this is the table nested. Oh, well, whatever. So we use the user authorized. That's the command that the developer uses to check. Now this command has a lot of magic behind the scenes, but it's really, the point here is it's really simple for a developer to implement the ACL in their component. I mean, it's just really simple. You define an XML file for your actions, and when you want to check if a user's got permission, you do this 1 line of code. It either gives you a true or false. Now again, there's a lot of magic in that, especially if you have a complicated hierarchical system, but the magic is behind the scenes. Okay. So I said that it was based on a predefined set of actions. These are the global actions that are predefined in Joomla at the global level. And most of them are fairly self-explanatory. Site logins, can I log in the front end? Admin login, can I log in the back end? Offline access, can I access the site when I'm offline? Super admin, I could do anything, any action. And then access component is, can I get to that manager screen? Does that show up on when I log into the back end? And then I've got, create, delete, edit. Edit state is, can I change, published to unpublished. And then edit own is, can I edit my stuff? Things that I've created.
Is that in the back end or the front end or both?
This is, this is set up in the back end, but the actions are both. The ones that make sense. Access component doesn't make sense.
No, I'm talking about the create, delete.
Yeah, create, edit, delete, edit state, edit own. Those are all equally relevant in the front end and the back end. Then, similar set of actions are defined at the component level, but obviously some of them don't make sense, like login doesn't make sense at a component level. Configure is a special one that, do I have access to that options button? Can I set up and then access component is, can I get to that component at all? Can I get to the manager? And then again, these others are all the same. Okay? So these are predefined by the developer as to what makes sense. And if you're developing somebody's developing a component, they could have more, they could have fewer. It's totally defined. But once they define that, then these are the actions that you can control with the ACL. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to do another little exercise here. Get people up and moving. I need some actions and some assets and some users. So people didn't come up before. I need 3 users, 3 assets, and 3 actions. How about that? 3, 3, 3. Come on. Don't be bashful here. I need 9 people. Actually, I need a 10th person too. Because this time, it's not obvious.
I'm what? I'm an action. You an action too?
Action. So actions over there. Let's put the assets over here.
Nope.
Look, I need more people. Come on. I need 3 more people. I need 3 users.
3 users.
Come on. And then I need somebody special. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so 3 users. So you can stay right in the middle. Okay, so what we're going to do here, so first user grab are you guys actions or assets? Grab an asset and an action. So,
I've never
okay.
felt more objective.
Okay, and then we need an action. Okay, so user read what you are,
G. Jefferson.
okay? And what's the asset?
I'm a menu manager.
Your menu manager, okay?
Great.
Create. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I didn't understand the user.
It's just a name. The point here is that we don't know. We don't have enough information, do we? But need somebody, one more person. Why don't you come up? We don't have enough information, and we don't really have an operating Joomla program. But what we do have is we have the magic 8-ball. Everybody know what a magic 8-ball is?
Yep. Ask again later. There is an
Yeah.
app for that.
There you go. So we've got a user, an action, and an asset, or an asset and an action, right? We got 3 things now. We don't have 2. We got 3 things. And we have to ask the magic 8-ball. So you got to push the button there and then read what it says.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, definitely. Okay. Let's get the next one. Who's the next user here? You can stay here. You did such a good job on that one. So who's the next user? Okay.
Oh,
I'm an asset.
Okay. So what's your user?
J. Adams.
John Adams. Okay.
I'm an article in the category math department.
Okay.
Add it on.
Pardon?
Add it.
Add it on. Okay. What's the magic 8-ball say?
It is decidedly so.
Okay. All right. Thumbs up. Okay. Let's do the last one real quick. Here we go. Who's the user?
I am Washington.
Okay.
I'm contacting technology teachers.
Okay. Contact. Okay. Contact in the category of teachers. Okay. And what's the action?
I'm excess components.
Okay. And what do we got?
My sources say no.
Oh. Okay. Okay. Thanks, guys. Okay. So the point here is 2 things. There's 2 takeaway lessons from that. One is that it's 3 things now we're putting together, not 2. Before we were putting together a user and an item and just checking the view level, right? This time we've got 3 things. We've got the user, we've got the asset or the item that they're trying to do something to, and then what they're trying to do. So it's a 3-pronged thing. And then the second takeaway point there is it's kind of complicated. I mean, you can, if you go back through and you can figure out how that action was determined, but it's not a simple thing of is it on this list or not, because it could be based on a group that's up above, it could be based on a category that's up above. So there's magic that happens in the authorized check to tell you if it works or not. Okay. Okay, so there's some special actions, as somebody pointed out earlier. Super admin can do any action on any component. So again, this is a perfect example of how in 1.6 or 1.7 you can make things simpler than they were in 1.5. If you've got a really simple site and there's you, like I have a simple site where I'm the webmaster and everybody else is just users. It's like, hey, I don't need any of these groups. I don't need nothing. I need super admin and that's it. So you can make life simpler. Access component is, can I get access to that backend? And this one, you need to have this, yes, if you want to be able to do any of those other actions in the backend. If you can't get to the component, obviously you can't do add, create, in the backend. But you don't have to have it. You can have add articles in the front end, but not have access component in the back. Yeah.
Is there a way to set it that you have a user who can view, let's say, 10 access levels, but can only create or edit in 3 of them?
Yeah, it's totally separate systems. You can have, that's what you got to, the view levels, what people can see is a completely different system than what they can do. So it doesn't have to follow at all.
So if you set up a user to have the rights to create, you can set them up to create only for certain access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay, and then I mentioned, I think configure is being able to click that options button and configure the options for the component. And then edit own is a special one, which gives you privileges for only items that you've created. Okay, okay, so I alluded before, hierarchical or flat. And basically, when we set up groups, we have the opportunity, if we want, to have a group inherit, have a parent group that's something other than public. Public is always stuck there at the top. It has to be the first group. But then anything underneath that is entirely up to you. So that gives you the opportunity, if you're setting up a large, complicated system, and you have math teachers, which are just like all teachers in general, except for a couple little tweaks, you can save yourself some work by setting up teachers and then just tweaking the permissions for the math teachers. But you don't have to do that. Okay, if you want to, you could just make math teachers, English teachers, science teachers all at the same level and just set them all up. It's entirely up to you. So, it's if you're if you're comfortable with the hierarchical thing and you're setting up a complicated one, then go for it. If you're not comfortable with the hierarchical thing and you'd rather do a little bit more work but have things be a little bit clearer in your mind, set it up that way. It's entirely up to the site admin how that's set up. And it's really just a trade-off between sort of a little bit more complicated if you have hierarchies, but potentially, depending on the situation, potentially a lot less work to set it up and to maintain it. But there's absolutely nothing in the design that requires you to use the hierarchical system.
Can you copy a hierarchical system from, say, one group to another without them being?
I don't think we have group. Do we have that? I think we have group copy stuff, do we? And at this point, I don't think we have any copy utilities. I mean, you could do it at the database level, but I don't think we have anything in the UI for the user interface for copy groups. Okay. Okay, so let's go in. So basically, if you're doing a simple non-hierarchical thing, it's pretty straightforward. For each group and each action, you set allowed or denied, and that tells you whether that person is allowed or denied to do that action on that on that asset. Okay, so for example, go back into here, and let's say we go into articles at the component level. You've got your different groups, and you would just go to each group and set the appropriate permission action, for each action. Yeah.
Probably the biggest thing I'd like I'd have a group maybe called site owner that who can edit or create articles and modules, but maybe nothing else.
Right.
So that's very easy to do here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, basically, you would just set up. I mean, you could either inherit from one of the group, but you could just set up a new group, and you would say that at the global level, you would leave it blank, which means that if you and this is a tricky thing here. I think I've got it in a later slide, but let's talk about it now. If you are when you have a hierarchical system, there's actually three options. Okay, there's allowed, denied, or leave it blank. Leave it blank means do what the next level up says. That's how you inherit, okay? Now, here's the little design question, right? What if you don't have a next level up? What if you're at the top level? Well, the way that the system is designed is if you leave it blank, it is everybody's got their favorite terminology for it. It's kind of like a soft deny, meaning that you can't do it, but you can override it at a lower level. Okay. Now, once you do an explicit deny, then you're done. Anything down below, even if you say allowed down below, it won't affect it. So when you do an explicit deny, it's done. You can't override that down below. Okay? And that's why if you look in the system here, there are, like in this first one here, okay, under manager configure, the setting is inherited, meaning that that's blank. And the calculated setting is not allowed, meaning that it's not allowed up above. So now if it was denied up above, it would say denied there, meaning can't be overridden. So the answer to your question is if you set up everything at the global level as not defined, as blank, then by default, if you don't set something up, everything is not allowed, right? And in your case, you only have two components you want to give the person access to. So it's easier to have it default to no, and then explicitly go in and give them yes, and give them allowed for the two that you want them in. You could do it the other way too, but it's just easier to start, just to save yourself work. Okay? Does that answer the question?
I think so. So in this case, say the site owner's name is Karen. The user Karen, I can assign to public, to registered, and to site owner.
Right.
And she would.
Right, and then site owner, you would just set up with like so they could do articles.
Articles and modules.
Right. So in articles, you would come in here and you'd say access component yes, da 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 yes yes yes, and in modules you'd say yes yes yes, and everything else it would say no no no. So when they log in, they're only gonna see the one.
Okay, thanks.
Matt?
That actually answers my
Okay.
question too.
Excellent.
Okay, excuse me.
Yeah.
When you in the configure it is inherited.
Yes.
So how to get how to see that from where it has been inherited? Is there
Well, in a perfect world, we'd have a JavaScript pop-up thing here that would kind of show you like a Firebug thing, but we don't have it. So it'd be nice. I mean, in this case, you know that it's inherited from one of the parent group. So, in this case, managers, so it'd be inherited from public. But it'd be really nice to have that ability like in a little pop-up or something like that to show it. What we do have that was really handy was this calculated setting. So when you change something, for example, if I change this to denied here, and I save, oops, I didn't mean to close it off. Now, when I go to the next group down, it changes that value too. So it's not rocket science to figure it out, but it would be. I agree. It'd be really cool if we had a little, some UI to show that. But we don't have it at this point. Okay.
Yes. If I could ask one more question.
Certainly.
Because the public made me think of that. So the public's the article options are being inherited from somewhere. And that was when we actually set up the group public and gave them their permissions.
Yes. Yeah. And out of the box, the setup here is just designed to mimic 1.5. But there's nothing about this setup that you have to keep. You can throw it all out, you can tweak it any way you want. But if you really like 1.5 and you know it and it does what you need, you don't have to mess with ACL at all. Just keep using it the way it is. Because this is almost, I mean, it's pretty close to exactly mimics the 1.5 behavior. There may be some little edge cases where it doesn't. I don't know. It's pretty close.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
Under each category and under each article, it gives you an option to set the permissions again.
Yeah.
Why would you want to go in individually in there and reset it rather than doing it globally?
Only if you needed different permissions. You know, like if you had a math department with the math articles that you wanted those faculty, those teachers to be able to edit, but you didn't want them to edit the articles for the English teachers.
But wouldn't you set that in the user? The permissions in the user rather than at the category level?
Well, you'd have to do both, right? You have to say that you put the math teacher in the math department, but then somewhere you have to say math department group has permissions for the math category, and the English department group has permissions for the English category.
Where exactly do you do that? I mean, I have a math articles category.
Right. Yeah. So in the category manager,
That's where I do the time,
yeah. Now, articles are a little different because articles actually you can go all the way down to individual articles if you want. I don't know. Most people wouldn't want to do that. But if I go to the categories here, I've got the same thing down here for each category. And again, it can be, but it need not be hierarchical. So you can, just like you can define your groups either flat or hierarchical, you can define categories flat or hierarchical. And it inherits.
How come public doesn't appear on that list?
Public isn't a category. That's
No,
I'm sorry. Public does appear. I'm sorry. Public is right here.
Oh, it's open, I'm sorry.
Yeah, public is open. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm sorry, if you created a category math teachers or something, and you wanted them only math teachers to be able to change those articles.
Yes.
What would you would just put allowed and everything else would be denied?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, and we'll go through an example like that. Okay. But yes, you would set up. I mean, a simple way to set it up to minimize the amount of work you have to do is to make the default that they can't edit anything. Because if you have 12 departments, it's easier, and they only can edit one, then it's easier to change one permission than to change 11, right?
Right.
You could have them all allowed and then go in deny, but it's easier to put in one allowed than. But if you had a case where they could do everything except this category, then you'd do it the other way, right? You'd say they're allowed for everything, but they're denied for this one. So the idea is to try to make it so you can really minimize the amount of maintenance you need to do down the road. So that's where the planning and thinking about it comes in, because it's quite a different use case. If I generally want something denied and only want it allowed here, or if I generally want it allowed and only want it denied in this one case.
I'm still a question about inheritance. I'm still unclear. So if the inheritance only goes to what the level is immediately above the child, or
no, it inherits. I mean, you could have groups that are 6 deep.
If you're going public, the standard public registered author, editor, publisher.
Right.
Then when you're setting publisher and it says inherited, it's inherited from public.
Right.
But you can make changes down through that sequence.
Right. It's inherited all the way down. I mean, for example, that's a good example. Let's look at registered. Okay. Registered, basically everything is inherited, nothing is allowed. Right.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is if you go to your public and then registered inherits from public,
right.
and then in register you switch delete from inherited to disallow, does publisher down the road inherit from public or from registered?
Well, from the
top.
whole tree. But yeah, but if you, as soon as you change to not allowed, then yeah, anything below that is not allowed. Any levels below that. Yeah, so you can look at it, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. You can look at it that it just inherits from the one immediately above.
Right.
But of course, that one inherits from the one immediately above that.
I see.
And that one inherits from the
Okay.
one immediately above that. So you're right, it's only the level above that you have to look at, but then that in turn, can be in, and you see that here. For example, here we've got registered is everything's inherited, so nothing is allowed. And then author, we've
so I see. So the calculated settings
tell you
what's really going on.
Exactly, what the current state is.
Okay.
And this tells you the setting. Okay.
Mark, would it be safe to say that anything set to inherited inherits any explicitly defined permission from its closest parent?
Yeah, it inherits the one. Yeah, it inherits the one from just above. But again, when you look at that one, that may be inherited from the one above that. But yes, if you look at the one immediately above, that should tell you why that one's that way. I mean, it's just like CSS, inheriting or whatever, right? It's the same thing. I mean, you can always look at it as the one just above, but then that one might be.
So if you're going quite a few levels deep and it gets confusing, you could always just skip the whole. That's a good. You're setting up a new group or new access level, and you just don't want to deal with that. Just ignore inheritance altogether and say allow or disallow, and then you're safe.
Right, and the simplest thing there would be just set it up at the top of the level. Set it up as a child of parent. The parent is, as a child of public. And the other thing you have to be careful about if you use an inherited thing is if you make a change up above, it's going to affect all of the child groups.
Right.
So you want to make sure, and which is a very powerful thing if it's what you want to do, but it could also, if you have a complicated system and you want to make sure if they change the math department, it's not going to screw up the English department.
There are some groups that are like, these groups are separate, they don't have anything to do with anything else.
Yeah, just make them separate.
Yeah.
Make them their
own.
own.
They could be at the top level of public.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's totally how you want to define it. Okay. Now, one thing that's really important, and again, a big difference between the two kind of systems, is when we were talking about viewing, there wasn't really any chance of a conflict. I mean, basically, all you did was, one user could be in multiple groups, and each group could have multiple view levels. So at the end of that process, you ended up with a list of view levels, but there wasn't any sense of deny or allow. It's just, it's either on the list or not, right? So there's no kind of conflict that could happen in that kind of situation. In this scenario, remember, a user can be in multiple groups. So I could have a group that says allow on create articles and another group that says deny on create articles. Right? Wouldn't necessarily be a good setup, but it could happen. Right? So the system has to decide what to do in that situation. Right? And as a general rule, the decision is that deny wins. So if I come up with a situation where for some reason, the way I've got it set up, I get allow from this guy, but I get deny from this group, then as a general rule, deny wins. Okay? Because remember, when we're in Joomla here, we're only looking at groups. Okay? But a user can be a member of more than one group. Right? Now that's why in the simplest situation, if you're on the action side of things, it's can make your life a little simpler if you have users in only one group, but that may not fit your use case. But what you don't want to do is if you have a user in a really restricted group, and then that same user is in a really powerful group, it doesn't make sense because it's not, it doesn't make sense, common sense, and it won't work well inside the program.
But it would be resolved the way you just said.
Exactly.
Because I can think of like a situation where you ban a user, so it would be
Right.
very, very convenient to do exactly.
Absolutely. Perfect example. And you don't have to take them out of all their other groups. You just put them in the banned group, and that'll give them and then if they come off the ban, you just take them out of that. That's an excellent use case. Now, there are a couple exceptions to the rule of denying wins. One is edit own, because edit own is kind of a peculiar special case, right? It's where you're giving somebody permission to do something just on things that they happen to have built. So basically, you can have a situation, in fact, you normally would want to have a situation where they're denied edit as a general rule, but they can edit their own stuff. So in that situation, edit own wins. Because otherwise it wouldn't really it wouldn't really be workable. And the other one that somebody mentioned earlier is the super admin. Super admin, basically when the user's checking authorized, or when the system's checking authorized, first thing it does is check if you're super admin. If you are, it's done. It doesn't care what you have set up. And again, as I mentioned, this whole notion of conflict doesn't apply to on the view side. There isn't any possibility for conflict over there. Okay? Okay. So let's talk about categories now. First of all, categories don't have any impact on the viewing side of things, other than you can set up a view, an access level for a category. But I mean, it doesn't impact the articles that are created under that. Each article has its own.
It's not inherent. If I have a category and I set a certain level, it doesn't matter.
No, each article is, when you create an article, you give it its own view access level.
There's no way to shortcut.
You can do it in a plugin.
Can you restrict the scope of plugins and other extensions?
Sure. Are they your plugins or somebody else's?
Well, this morning you had the one where you added a signature to a
Sure.
document.
Yeah.
Can you say certain documents cannot have that type of cannot be affected like
Sure.
that?
Yeah, you could do it, and if you're writing your plugin, you could do anything like that you want.
mean,
but yeah.
As the overall, to keep other third-party plugins from doing things on specific
I don't know. I think it would depend on the specifics there. But what you can do with the ACL, for example, if you only give somebody create in one category, then that's the only, what category it's going to be created in. Okay, so there's no impact on the viewing levels, but there is potentially a big impact on the action permissions, on what people can do. And again, it's very similar to the groups. You can set up categories in a hierarchy, or you can set up categories that are all at the same level. And if you set them up all at the same level, then the permissions for that category only affect things in that one category. If you set them up hierarchical, you have the opportunity to have the permissions be inherited, by the child categories.
Again, on that side, with the articles underneath the category, again, you have to say that completely separately, or can you inherit? In other
No,
words,
those would inherit, on the action side, they inherit, yes.
the articles do inherit from the
Yes,
category
absolutely.
that they're sitting, so
Yes.
I can hit it at the top and be done with this
Yes,
issue.
exactly. Yeah, and again, it's how fine-tuned you need it to be, right? I mean, you know, you've got your component level, and for a lot of people, that's all you care about. You wanted the guy to be able to do articles and modules and nothing else. Well, you just set it up at the component level and you're done. But if you need to go down to the next level of categories, you can do that. And then if you need to be more fine-tuned than that, you can make the categories hierarchical and then on content, on articles, you can actually set each article ACL if you want. Okay, so that's a lot of theory. Let's talk about some examples. How much time do we have? We have about 15 minutes left. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Okay, so let's talk about an example similar to what you had, right? We want back-end article administrators, so they're going to have permissions for articles, but not for anything else, okay? And there's two ways we could set that up. We could set that up non-hierarchical, or we could inherit from the manager group that's already there, okay? Now, one thing that's really important, I think anybody's played with this has probably hit. I know I've hit it about 3 times, and each time I have to go, what was this again? Is that by default, and this is only a default, it could be changed, but by default, all of the modules in the back end have an access level of special. So if you create a new back end, a new group that you want to have back end privileges, then you have to include the special access level. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to log in, and then there's nothing there. You know, and I've done that about 3 times, and each time I'm going, oh gosh, what was this? Yeah.
All right. I was kind of waiting to ask this question, but this is a good time to answer that. So in the back end, say you're setting up like actual personas, right? Like bloggers, e-commerce, shop manager, whatever. They could potentially want to see entire different sets of everything, right? Menu items, modules. So to that effect, you'd almost have to do a one-to-one with groups and access levels, right? If you wanted to see completely different things for completely different groups and not all be smashed into one special access level or whatever, you really need a one-to-one for the viewing of modules and menu items.
Well, let's think about this. If you,
My head hurts.
if
It gets complicated, very complicated. Back.
Thanks. Okay, the first rule to keep in mind is that if 2 modules have the same access level, then anybody that can see one can see the other. Right? So if you have, that's sort of your greatest level of granularity. So you're right. I mean, if you had a situation where there was no commonality between what these people would, but let's say you had, I would think a more typical use case would be like you got bloggers who want to see these 6, modules, and you got somebody else that wants to see these 6, right? And maybe there's a little bit of overlap. Maybe some of them are separate and some of them are the same, right? So you just need to divide your access levels. In that example, you'd have 3, right? You'd have bloggers only, you'd have contributors only, and you'd have one that would be common or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then the bloggers get the blogger and common, the contributors get the contributor in common,
right.
And then they can see the ones that they're supposed to see. Now you're right, if it gets crazy, then you're going to end up with with more access levels. But it's not that crazy because usually There should be groups.
Yeah.
But anyway, the key thing is if you create a new back-end user, you log in, and you had a blank screen, it's probably because you forgot to give them special access. Now that's only the default setup. If you've changed that's all user configurable. So if you've changed that, then that won't happen. But, okay?
Can we have a real life example of
Yeah, that's what I was just.
permission? Like, say, if an administrator does not want to give an access to a particular component to other users.
To a particular component?
Yeah.
Right, okay, that's what I was just going to show here, okay? So if I wanted to create a group, let's see here, did I create already? This. Okay, so let's create an article-only group, okay? So I'm only going to have access to the one component, right? Okay, so you want to do hierarchical or non-hierarchical? Let's do non first, okay? So I've got my group here, and sorry, I'm going to have to get down here so I can see. Let's see. Okay, so I need to go to my global configuration now because I've got a new group. Whoa. Okay. So what permissions do I want for this guy? Well, I want him to be able to do an admin login, right? And I don't want him to. I want him to be able to do. I don't want him to be able to do access component because I only want him to have one component. So it'll save me. I could set him up allowed and then go in and set up denied on all the other ones. But it's easier if I just leave this inherited, not allowed, right? And so I'll just leave all of these others the same, right? Everybody understand that?
Why wouldn't you set up create, delete, edit as
I'm at the
allowed?
global level now. I'm not at the component level. If I wanted this person to be able to do all components, then that's what I would do. I'd set it up allowed everywhere.
Oh, you know what's
But I only want this guy to do one component, so I'll save myself some work if I leave him not allowed, and then just allow him on the one component. They both work. It's just how much work I want to do. And I'm the laziest people I know. Now, before I forget, I'm going to go in here to access levels. Special, I don't want to show you what, so then I'm going to add my article only manager. Otherwise I would have that problem that I just described, right? And the UI here isn't great. It would be better if you could do the access levels right when you create the group, but nobody's had time to do that.
Could you please illustrate that last step again?
Pardon?
Could you please repeat this step, the special?
Well, just because let me just save this and show you. If I go to my module manager here, and I go to administrator to show all the back-end modules, so these are all the modules that are part of the back end. If you look over here, they all come as special. This is just the way it ships. You could change this, but the way it comes out of the box is these are all set to special. So if I create a new back-end user who has the admin login privilege, but I forget to include special here, then I log in and I see a blank screen because all the menus are modules that have special access. so it's.
Illustrate that and just change the module, the title to something else.
Pardon?
Illustrate that and change mod underscore title to like a public or some other group, and just to show them that even the title of the page is a module here.
Oh, right. Was that the admin submenu or which one is that? Well, we've got 6 minutes here.
Sorry.
Okay, so now I've created the user, so then the other thing I wanted to do was give this user article manager permissions, right? It could be any component, but just for the sake of argument, let's say article manager, right? So here, by default, they've got nothing. Do we want to give them the options? Do you want to let them do options or not? Sure, yes, okay. So we say allowed there, allowed there. Now if I do save here, now it shows the calculated setting is allowed. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it would be to create a group. If I look here at, let's see here, let's go into global configuration. If I look here at the, I think it's the, so the other way I could do this would be to create a group that it hangs off of the manager group, and then I would have a little bit less setup to do. But the end result would be exactly the same. Okay? Okay? 5 minutes? 4 minutes?
But again, say the question was for some specific component.
Yeah, that's what this is. So let's create our user here and actually log in. Okay? Just to show that this works. So, only and I'm going to make him a member of the article-only manager group. What are the odds that I got this right? Okay. So, remembered to make them special, so I get the back-end menus, and I've got article manager, full privileges, including the options there, but I don't have anything else.
How would you restrict them to only articles that they, like if it's a blogger, if they only articles that they wrote?
That's what the edit own does.
Yeah.
Yeah, the edit own was a special action in there.
So right now they can see all the articles and edit all the articles.
Right, but if I came in here and
So shut all those off except left edit on.
Right, exactly. And I wouldn't see the ones. Yeah.
What if you only wanted them to edit articles in a certain category of
Right.
the site?
It's the same thing, and you would set that up at the category level then. So, yeah, if I go to the category manager for any category, I've got the same ACL setup for the category that I had at the component level.
Again, sorry, but I think my question still remain unanswered, or maybe I'm not able to answer it.
I thought you wanted one component, right?
Like say I have installed Joomla Social
Yeah.
and many other payload. Now I want that administrator should only be able to access Joomla Social and no other user should be able to access it through admin. Rest all other components he can access.
Okay.
So how to do that?
Well, first of all, the extension has to support the ACL. So I don't know in that example if they support it. Any extension that supports the ACL, you would set it up, you'd have the one user would be set up this way. And then if you didn't want to have any super admin user, you would, I don't know that I think you would want to have a super admin user that could do everything. Because I think you pretty much have to have a super admin user on the site. I guess you don't have to, but the difference with the super admin is that's the only one that can do the global configuration. So if you don't have one, everybody would have to have the same global configuration. But it just depends on whether that component supports the ACL or not.
So do you mean that the component itself should have a configuration file that should provide some access level control?
Yeah, when you write a component for the ACL, there's basically a couple things you have to do. One is you create an XML file that defines the actions for your component, and then you code in the user authorized method to check that the user is authorized to do those actions. But it's up to the component developer to support the 1.6 and 1.7 ACL. If they don't do that, then you can only do what they allow you to do.
At the registration process, when somebody's logging in for the first time or registering,
yeah, is
there a place there where they could select what user group they're going to belong to?
Yeah, you select that in I think it's in the user's options.
So in other words, you don't have to manually go in and assign people to different user permissions.
You can. This new user registration group is the default setting there. But you could use. You could use a plugin if you had some rules that you wanted for, how you wanted to assign groups. This is just the default. If you don't, if you just do the normal vanilla process, it'll put new registered users in whatever group you have to find there.
But if they were math teachers, then you'd have to go in afterwards and assign them to the math teacher permission group.
Yes.
Or level access level.
Yes. The group. Assign them. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thanks very much.
Tired.